Oh, there we go.
Before we enter the body of the webinar, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet and pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. This is the Settling the Mind webinar series, a special series that we've put together to help everybody manage the difficulties that come with the COVID-19 pandemic and the restrictions that have been put on our lives as a result of the pandemic. Before we begin, I'd just like to say to you that as you've just seen, you're going to need to give Jill and I a tiny bit of technological slack because, like you, we're working from home. So unfortunately, the PowerPoint for this webinar is not going to be available, but it will be up on the Black Dog Institute's website for viewing on demand in a day or two. So I urge you to go back and watch it again if you're interested in making some notes about the content. My name's Jan Orman. I'm a GP from Sydney with a special interest in mental health. I'm also a facilitator with Black Dog Institute's professional education team. I have with me Professor Jill Newby, who is a clinical psychologist and associate professor at the University of New South Wales. Jill's special research interest is understanding and treating depression and anxiety with a specific focus on online interventions, which is something that we all probably need to look at in this time when we can't go out and see somebody for our difficulties very easily. Today we're going to discuss some tips to manage anxiety and some places that we can go to get help for anxiety. Before we go on to that, there's just one thing that I need to tell you, and that is you've got a Q&A box. We'd be delighted if you would ask questions, make comments in the Q&A box, and I'm going to try and keep my eye on it so that hopefully we can address as many questions as possible. We've only got half an hour, so it's possible that we might miss some of your questions, in which case right at the very end on the last slide there's an email address that you can contact us if there's a burning issue that you need to talk to us about. So Jill, tell me first of all, we all know the physical symptoms of anxiety, like sweaty palms and palpitations, that's a rapid heart rate and perhaps a dry mouth. But sometimes there are subtle things that go under the radar that we may not realise are symptoms of anxiety. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, that's right, Jan. I think when we all think of anxiety, we think of someone that's panicking and maybe sweating profusely. But actually, anxiety can look very different to different people. So some people might be just worrying a lot, might be having difficulty concentrating on their day-to-day activities. Other people might be thinking the worst, feeling like they're just not coping. They might feel like they're irritated or overwhelmed or stressed or nervous. And then there's the behaviours. So they might be avoiding situations that they're worried about. So it can look very different to different people.
Someone's already asked in the chat box how to control anger when at home trying to work and trying to control the kids at the same time. Now, that fits with what you're saying, I think, that anger and irritability can actually be a sign of anxiety, that you might need to do something about your anxiety.
Yeah, and they can often start when you're feeling overwhelmed and stressed.
So you might think that it's overwhelming anger, but in fact, what you're looking at is a manifestation of anxiety. So tell us a little bit about how we can manage our anxiety.
Okay, well, there's a few things, and what we're going through is the top 10 tips that we've written in a fact sheet on the Black Dog Institute website. So the first thing is anxiety can make us paralyzed in some sense, and we can sort of avoid or procrastinate or not do anything when we feel anxious. So the first step that I think is really important is to turn that anxiety into action. So rather than stewing or worrying about the situation that we're in or looking too far in the future, it's really important to get informed with accurate information about COVID-19. Make a plan about how your family and yourself are going to cope with isolation and quarantine, and then make preparations for how you're going to do that. The other thing that you can channel your anxiety into action is to learn about your anxiety triggers. So even just journaling when you feel more anxious and less anxious, and what's happening at those times, or how you're feeling and thinking at those times, can be a helpful way to learn what to put in the day that's more helpful.
And that's what anxiety is all about, isn't it? It's there. There's a healthy level of anxiety that's meant to motivate us to do something about the perceived threat that we're facing. So
Yeah.
yes, there is, in answer to the question in the chat box, there is a healthy level of anxiety.
There is, and our research that we've just done, and also research from past pandemics, show that a little bit of anxiety is helpful, because those people who feel a bit more anxious tend to do the things that keep themselves and other people safe, like hand washing, cleaning, social distancing. So in that sense, not all anxiety is bad.
And we've all experienced the anxiety before exams. If we didn't have it, we wouldn't do any studies. So that's the kind of purpose that it has, isn't it?
Yeah.
But at some point, normal anxiety gets in our way.
Yeah, that's right. And when it impacts on your day-to-day activities, when it's getting in the way of your relationships, and your functioning or your sleep, that's when it's really important to do something different. So the second tip that we have is really around your consumption of media and information. That could be misinformation from conversations that you're talking about with other people, social media, or traditional media like news, and sort of online articles. So it's really important to think about what role this is having during your day, and depending on how anxious it's making you feel, then to either limit or completely avoid it. So it's important we stay informed through maybe government websites, so we get the accurate information. But what we know from a lot of research is that media tends to look at the worst case scenarios. They use really alarming and sensational language that makes us feel anxious. And so this is probably having a very big impact on people's anxiety. So limiting it and cutting it down is really important to help feel a little bit less anxious.
And this very much includes social media too, doesn't it?
Yeah, and there's a lot of misinformation that's spread through social media and traditional media sometimes as well, but particularly social media. And it can be hard to tell what's fact from fiction. So limiting social media, if you're finding that's making you feel anxious or upset or distressed, can be very helpful. Now, the third thing that we suggest is there actually are some behaviours that can fuel anxiety, particularly anxiety about your health. So a couple of those behaviours are scanning or excessive monitoring of your symptoms. So I think we've probably all experienced some health anxiety moments since the start of this COVID-19 outbreak, maybe noticing ourselves coughing a bit more or worrying about niggles in our throat. When we pay too much attention to our body, it's called hypervigilance to our sensations, that can make ourselves feel more anxious because we get more worried about the symptoms in our body. So trying to pay attention and distract yourself from those physical symptoms can be a helpful thing to do. And the other thing that can fuel anxiety about your health is Dr. Google. So when we spend too much time looking up different information about different illnesses, particularly COVID-19, that can make people feel more anxious. So cutting that down or avoiding that completely is going to be a good way to go.
A little while ago, you talked about journaling. Tell us a little bit about more about journaling in order to identify your triggers.
Yeah, so it can just be as simple as getting a note out in your phone or a piece of paper. You write a couple or a few times a day, what's my level of anxiety at the moment, from 0 to 10. 0 is not at all anxious, 10 is extremely anxious, and 5 somewhere in the middle. What am I doing? What am I thinking about? And how I'm feeling. So it could be as simple, I'm at home alone. I'm watching the news and I'm feeling really anxious. And then later in the day, it could be I'm distracted, reading a book, or talking to a friend, and I'm feeling less anxious. So it's as simple as that, just writing what's going on at the time. And then you can start to track over time. If you're doing this for a few days, you track over time what things help and what things don't help your anxiety.
Which is a clue to how to change your behaviour in order to keep your anxiety at a manageable level.
Yep, because you start when you learn from that information, you can use the information that you're learning to plan the next day. So if you find there's particular trigger times or times when you're feeling a lot worse, then put those things into your day or plan those things into your day that help ease the anxiety.
Of course, sometimes changing your behavior is not the easiest thing in the world to do either, and we have to acknowledge that. But you have to weigh up whether the anxiety that goes with not changing your behavior is worse or better than the anxiety that goes with changing your behavior, and that's a decision that everybody has to make for themselves, huh?
That's right. And it's really important to use it as sort of an experiment, like test these things out, see what helps, what works, try and be flexible and change what you're doing if you can. Because little things make a big difference. You don't need to make major changes. Even just cutting down the amount of time you spend searching the internet from half an hour to 20 minutes can make a big difference. Okay, so the next thing that is really important is to notice the type of anxious thoughts that you're having and trying not to give them too much power. I think sometimes this is easier said than done, but there are a range of different online programs which we'll talk about at the end of the webinar, which can help you get the skills to do this. So negative thoughts can make us feel very anxious, and we're often not aware of the anxious thoughts that we're having. So writing those down can be a first step in getting some distance away from them, getting aware of how much we're thinking in anxious ways. There are some techniques like thought challenging, questioning the types of thoughts that you're having to try and think about which are the most helpful ways to think in this particular moment that might make us feel less anxious. So sometimes we ask people, okay, what would a reasonable or calm friend say to you in this situation if they were here? Because that can be a good way of thinking about something from a different perspective.
I think the people that survive best in times like this are the people who can be flexible, both in their behavior and their thinking. A lot of people I meet rigidly say, no, 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 what I'm thinking is right. I can't think anything different. And that's not a good evolutionary thing. I mean, that's absolutely destined to make you feel more anxious than you are. So what we're after here is some cognitive flexibility, that's thinking flexibility, in order to survive.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for also for all of us to acknowledge that this is a really difficult and challenging situation. For a lot of people, it's going to be an awful time, and it's very stressful, particularly those young parents that are managing young kids at home, trying to do many different things, including work. And it is not a good time for a lot of people, and acknowledging that, but also on the same side, trying to think of the most helpful ways to get through this time that can make it as least worse as possible will help ease the anxiety. So the other part of that is really around focusing on the here and now. So anxiety tends to make us think of the worst things that can happen in the future. And at the moment, we're very uncertain. So we actually don't know what's going to happen. There are really good signs in Australia. We're really lucky to be here. The curve looks like it's flattening, but we don't know how long we're going to be in isolation or working from home or until this situation gets back to normal. So I think taking each day step by step and focusing on the here and now, particularly when you're doing activities at home, whether that's something fun or whether that's something distracting, can help ease the anxiety, because then you're not caught up in worries, you're caught up in the here and now.
You know, Jill, I've found that lots of people respond well to an activity that helps them stay focused on things outside them. And one of the best activities is to photograph things, to find a theme for photography. We've all got smartphones now that do it, and focus on finding things that illustrate that theme. That's just a little technique to make sure that you are involved in the here and now a little more effectively.
Yeah, and everyone will find different things that help them. Some people, like to listen to heavy metal. Some people like to listen to really calming music. Other people like to do relaxation or meditation. And some people find yoga helpful. So in our survey that we've just done of around 5,000 people, we were looking at the types of exercises people are doing each day that help them feel better or to stay on top of their mental health. And you're right, hobbies, projects, activities were a really big one. Like they were one of the most common things that people are doing to keep themselves mentally healthy. So your hobby might be reading, or it might be listening to music, or it might be photography, like you said, but it's finding out what works for you and your family. That's the most important thing. So one of the other things that we really need to make sure we're looking after, and I know this is easier said than done, is looking after your body. So sleep is a powerful immune booster, but it's also a powerful way to help you manage your emotions the next day. So when we're not getting enough sleep, we're often more emotional. We find it harder to manage anxious thoughts. It's hard to control our sort of normal habit type behaviors, and we tend to be more irritable and snappy with other people. So getting enough sleep and prioritizing sleep is really critical for anxiety.
It's all very well to say get enough sleep, but if you're so anxious you can't sleep, that's a real problem, isn't it? And that, of course, is the symptom that we didn't mention when we were talking about symptoms of anxiety generally. It's probably the commonest symptom of anxiety, isn't it, Jill?
Yeah, it is. And fatigue, on the other hand, is a
Mm,
big
mm,
symptom. And if
mm.
it's at that point where you're struggling to sleep because you're that anxious, I think it'd be helpful to get some professional support. And we'll go through some options at the end. The other thing is looking at what you're eating. Sometimes things like caffeine and other stimulants can make you feel more anxious. And so cutting that down will be a helpful way to manage that. And then exercising, but finding the right type of exercise for you. It could be just getting out, doing a small walk outside in the sun. That can be helpful. For some people, it might be yoga, and for other people, it might be more intense exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Um, Another thing is staying connected with other people. We know that a lot of people are feeling quite isolated and lonely at the moment. They might have felt like that before, but it can be exacerbated, particularly people who are living at home and who aren't in touch too much with their family or loved ones. Staying connected through virtual means, whether it's virtual dates, coffee dates, or just a phone call, can be a big way to reduce the anxiety. But sometimes we also need to cut down the amount that we're talking about COVID-19. Make sure we're trying to talk about some other things, that especially if this is an anxiety provoking topic for you. Talking about anything else but can be helpful.
What else is there is something I have to ask you.
Even
That's what
just,
we're finding, isn't it? But we
that's
have to
right.
make an effort.
Yeah, that's right. And it could be even talking about what you're looking forward to most when isolation is finished. You know, I've started to write a post-isolation bucket list about the things that I want to do, and like planning for the future about the things that that I'm looking
Mm,
forward to. Yeah.
mm, mm.
Sometimes helping other people and being kind and compassionate and doing things that are nice for other people can help improve our mood. And that's one of the things that we're seeing. People are getting more connected to their neighbours and loved ones, particularly those that are more vulnerable and can't go out at the moment.
Which brings me to a number of questions in the chat box that are asking, how can we help other people? How can we look after other people in the household, or spouses, family and friends who are experiencing excessive anxiety at the moment? Maybe you could refer them to the recording of this webinar when it comes up on the website. So
Yeah,
that's one of my suggestions. Have you got any other suggestions on that front, Jill?
I think talking to them, listening, validating what they're feeling as well. Sometimes we don't need to fix what other people are feeling. If they're anxious, just having someone to talk to that listens to them and doesn't dismiss their concerns can be a really powerful way to help them. Their anxiety might be high at the moment. It will get better. But just being there for them can be helpful. Doing things as a family or together with them could be arranging, you know, to exercise together or to do a family activity together. So then they're not having to organize and initiate it. If you do things together and you're initiating it, that will probably help that other person too. The other thing is also to encourage them to get some more support if it's getting too high.
Absolutely, some professional support, because just because it's normal and appropriate to be anxious about COVID-19, it's not okay to be disabled by that anxiety.
That's right, and you don't need to be. There are so many different techniques and helps available, supports available, and great professionals that know how to help people with anxiety. You don't need to suffer in silence, and your family members don't need to either. So I would encourage people to encourage their family members to get the support that they might need. And something is similar, you know, I was talking about how we can work together as families or do some activities together that might help ease the anxiety. Even just taking a deep breath and doing some relaxation activities together as a family can be helpful. Even just taking a couple of minutes out, slow, deep breaths, can ease that level of anxiety that we tend to feel at this point in time. Okay, so the other thing that we've mentioned a bit is around seeking professional advice. So if you or other people are feeling like they're not coping, it's very important to seek a professional's opinion. They can do a proper assessment, give you education about anxiety, but also direct you to the right supports.
And the first person you probably should see is your GP.
Yes, and GPs are available online and via telehealth and phone appointments now. The great thing the federal government has done is open that up. So it enables us to be in the comfort of our own homes, but being able to talk to our GP to get a Medicare mental health plan and a referral to a local psychologist or psychiatrist that specialises in anxiety.
There's a specific question in the chat box. Now we're talking about online tools, Jill, about online tools to help monitor your anxiety. And there's just a couple that are worth mentioning. One of them is the first one on this list here, which is the Black Dog Institute My Compass program, which has got some wonderful things in it to help you manage your symptoms of anxiety and depression for that matter. But it also has a tracking aspect to it that drops down onto your phone and allows you to track how you're going on a daily basis. There's another app, an Australian app called Mood Prism, that's PRISM, which is also a very good way to keep track of how you're feeling.
Yep, there are two great options, and they will be able to sort of explain how to do it and give you the tools to be able to do that at home.
And the Black Dog Institute's online clinic is a great way to find out whether your anxiety and your low mood even are normal for the times that we're in, or are high enough to require that you need some help. Tell us a little bit about the online clinic, Jill.
So the online clinic is a free and anonymous and confidential clinic where you do a range of different online screening assessments. So you answer a range of different questions about your mood, about anxiety, about worries about coronavirus and health anxiety, and about our other experiences like eating problems or alcohol use. And then it gives you some feedback at the end and directs you to the most appropriate online tools and supports that are available, depending on how severe your symptoms. So if you're experiencing really severe symptoms, that it would encourage you to seek face-to-face support and GP support, as well as potentially an online program. Whereas for other people who might experience moderate to mild symptoms, they might be referred straight to an online program.
Mm-hmm. This Way Up's one of those online programs, isn't it, Jill?
Yeah, so a couple of the online programs on My Compass, as we've already talked about, This Way Up online programs, which are free at the moment, and they have programs for stress management, for health anxiety, and for worrying, and a range of other conditions like insomnia. So if you're one of those people who is having trouble sleeping because of the anxiety, either an anxiety or an insomnia or sleep program can help. And there are other programs for kids as well. So Brave Online is a good one that specifically helps kids with anxiety or young people with anxiety. And then there's some really nice, easy to read anxiety resources at the Centre for Clinical Interventions. So all of those are really great resources that are evidence-based, they've been shown to work, and they'll direct you to other sources of support if you need it. Okay. We have also got some helpful fact sheets and information that might be helpful for you, your family members, or people that you know around COVID-19 and the mental health impacts of COVID-19. We're also doing research to try and explore the impacts of COVID-19 on people's mental health. And so the results will be updated on there as soon as we get them in. So if you, we do actually recommend people sign up to the email for a weekly update, because that provides new resources. It makes these webinars available and tells people when these webinars are up online, and it sort of directs to other resources that can be helpful.
There are a lot of questions in the chat box about children and adolescents specifically, and I just wonder if the people asking the questions are aware that we did one about managing children and adolescents last week, mostly younger children with Elisa Werner-Seidler from Black Dog, but that should be available on the website as well. And we're going to continue producing webinars in this series. So all the things that you're saying in the chat box and in the feedback form at the end of the webinar will go towards our decisions, informing our decisions about what we do the next lot of webinars. About half-hour webinars, it's kind of hard to fit everything in. The other thing that's coming up in the chat box, Jill, is a number of questions about medications and where medications fit into the picture, and about people with pre-existing mental health conditions and what to do about the anxiety of COVID. If you've got a pre-existing mental health condition, take the medications question first.
Okay. So the medications, it obviously depends on your circumstances and depends how severe your symptoms are. What the research shows is the first line treatment for anxiety or an anxiety disorder should be cognitive behavioral therapy with a specialist. So I wouldn't recommend necessarily anxiety medications as the first line. I would strongly encourage you to get CBT from a trained practitioner before you start medications. Now that said, if you're experiencing severe symptoms and you talk through this with a GP or psychiatrist and they recommend that a combined approach might be helpful, then there are some medications that are helpful, particularly antidepressants like SSRIs or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. I would say that I would encourage you to avoid benzodiazepines like Valium. It can be addictive and we don't recommend that for anxiety.
One of the reasons they work very well is that one of the reasons they're addictive is that they work really very well.
Yeah.
And the trouble is their effect only lasts for about a week. And once that's over, you need to put the dose up so it can go up and up and up. And that becomes really, really dangerous. So stay away from Valium and its family members if you can, and look for more behavioural methods of managing your anxiety.
Yeah, and sometimes the behavioural methods do take a bit longer to work. So I understand that there's going to be some anxiety in the meantime, but the research shows that the behavioural methods like cognitive behavioural therapy have better long-term outcomes for you. So I would strongly encourage you to do that. And those online programs that we mentioned before, plus talking to your GP about specialist services is the way to go for this. Now, the second question was around pre-existing mental health conditions. And yes, in the research that I've done, as I mentioned, we've done a survey of around 5,000 people already, and we have found that people with pre-existing mental health conditions are feeling more anxious, more lonely, more scared about coronavirus. They're having a worse time, which is not surprising. In past pandemics, that's happened before. So people with pre-existing mental health conditions had higher rates of distress during that time. If you're already linked in or you have previously seen a psychologist or psychiatrist or mental health clinician, including a GP for your mental health, and you're not currently doing that, I would encourage you to get back in touch with them sooner rather than later, because it can be helpful just to reach out for them to remind you about the skills or the things that have worked in the past and to get back on track early. If you have had a pre-existing mental health condition and you're not linked in with services or you haven't been seeing a mental health clinician for a while, I'd encourage you to talk to your GP to get a mental health plan, to get you linked in with a psychologist or psychiatrist to help support you through this time, because it's likely that you will be experiencing increased stress, but there are things that you can do to help.
Absolutely. I'm seeing that there are lots and lots of questions in the chat box that we haven't actually had time to address. So my recommendation would be to go to the Black Dog Institute website and make sure we haven't talked about it before on one of the webinars and have a look at those. But also fill in the feedback sheet that's going to be available to you, or email us at that email address that you can see on the slide, that final slide, and we will be able to devise another webinar or directly respond to you with answers to your questions. And that applies to a number of the questions that have been in the chat box that we simply haven't had time to address. So thank you all very much for being here today. We hope you've given you some clues about what to do. I want to acknowledge the people who are in a complete mess with kids and work and everything at home, and feeling anxious about all of that, and hopefully we'll be able to address that in future webinars. But please look after yourselves, do the things that you know you need to do in order to reduce your anxiety, and see that little bit of anxiety that's left as a positive thing that is driving you to do the right thing. Thanks, Jill. It's been
Thank you.
great to talk to you. Goodbye, everybody, and thank you very much for coming.